I've entitled this Closing the Engagement Gap for a couple of reasons. One is the fact I have run into this term, this specific element of frustration in the workplace. I see it everywhere. I work with a lot of executives, and all of them are saying, I just wish that we can actually increase the productivity of our employees. Now, to a degree, these individuals, and I stand corrected, many of you maybe are not in this position, believe that the engagement gap is an employee issue. Now, there was a time where I actually felt that too. And what I have found over time is that no, it's not. There may be partially an employee issue, but predominantly it is a leadership issue. So as you can see, this gentleman trying to sort of jump from one chasm over to the other, or through over the chasm here. Engagement is measurable. Many of you have probably had the opportunity, and if you haven't, there will come a time, especially based on the size of your company, to really have what's referred to as a employee study done in terms of employee effectiveness surveys. And there's a couple of companies out there that if you start hearing Aon, Hewitt, or Hay Group, or others, Gallup is another one that I'm familiar with. They actually will come in and actually measure how well you are doing as an organization in this area of engagement. Most organizations, and I'm sure that many of you are in a position right now where more is expected with less in terms of finances and people. So it really is really incumbent on you and me as a leader to start looking at what is it that really we can enhance in terms of, yes, we can cut costs to a certain degree, but we're still also needing to create productivity or become more productive in what we're doing. So in this particular thing, I just want you to be able to say, you know what, it is measurable. I'll show you a survey that has been done where it has been measured. And the statistics, when I first saw them about 10 years ago when Gallup did them, have now been redone and effective 2013. Another report has been issued that actually has measured, in fact, what is happening not only worldwide, but here in North America. Has anybody been part of a employee engagement survey? And if so, what did you think of it? So I'm going to give you some time here to get down to basically the questions and just type in if you've been part of a survey in the last 5 years. Okay, I see one hand go up. Okay, there comes a couple more. Now, what I have found is that when I consult with organizations all over North America and actually the world, is the fact that we see the survey results, but very often we don't see exactly what is being done about it. And this is really your role as a leader, is the fact that, yeah, you may have received some guidance from some individual in terms of whoever did the engagement survey. But I want to spend some time today really talking about, what is it that you can do to increase the value of the survey, but two, to start lessening that engagement gap. So I want to show you what I refer to as the numbers. There was a show out there, I forget what it was called, that says "Show me the money." This is sort of the same thing. The numbers speak for themselves. The surveys are all out there. They are accessible, and I would welcome you to take a look at just sort of maybe even your own survey. Here's what I have found from the research, and this is actually provided by Gallup in 2013. As far as the world workplace engagement. Now, when I first saw this, like I say, about a decade ago, I was staggered by what was happening in the workplace. Currently, the engaged workplace is only 13%. Now, stop and think about the ramifications of that. They also have said that actively disengaged, there's 24% of the population that are actively disengaged. What I found startling is, and I still do, is the fact that in the world, now there's socioeconomic issues that are actually brought into this. The economies of a lot of the countries worldwide in 2013, 2012 have not been that great. But look at that number of disengaged in terms of the workplace engagement. What's your first thought? Write down what you're thinking right now. What's the implication for you? Yeah, absolutely, Carol. Um, especially if you're working globally, you need to understand that, things just do not operate as they do here in Canada or actually in the United States. The other one that I find also just as, it is better, but not to the degree that I'd be jumping up and down. This is what's happening in the North American workplace in terms of engagement. Once again, engaged, 30%, well, 29. Actively disengaged is 18%. And the disengaged population is at approximately 54%. Now, what Gallup has found is that the cost to the US, Canada was not measured, is an estimated $350 billion in lost productivity. Now, if that doesn't scare you, I don't know what will in terms of productivity, in terms of, okay, how does this apply to me in my workplace? Greg, you're talking about North America. Yes, I am. But you need to understand that this can be and has been taken to the fact that it can be categorized in terms of what impact does it have on my company. And I'll talk about that in a minute. The actively disengaged, okay, staggering number. So what is disengaged? I have a lot of people ask me when I present this in sort of a workshop frame, what does disengaged mean? Uh, they're basically people that are very unhappy, unproductive, and basically are the ones at the water coolers spreading negative stuff. It's impossible for us to actually harness them in terms of innovation and growth and customer satisfaction. And this is the place where I find it sometimes when you actually go to department stores or whatever else, watch the faces of people and ask yourself, as far as customer satisfaction, what is reflected but what I see in that individual? And again, the other question comes to mind is, how do people perceive you? How engaged are you on a scale of, let's say, 1 to 5, being extremely engaged? And don't take it personally, but I'm just saying the fact that we are somewhat responsible for our own actions. But sometimes the environment around us, our workplace environment, sometimes stinks, and we really, are sort of victims of the circumstance. And if you're one that is creating that environment, today is probably going to be a good day for you, because I'm going to show you some things that you can in fact change around you. McLean and Company is another research company that I spent some time doing some research around when it comes to engagement. And what they have said, there's a growing percentage of employees are what they refer to quit and stay. They mentally or physically show up, but mentally they're somewhere else. And they go through the process, and they're hard to find in the process. But what McLean has established is the fact that of those that were disengaged, 55% that their performance declined. 55% say they spent time at non-related issues in the workplace. 49% that they did only what was required to get the job done. And people, this is my frustration. Is the fact that we need to find some way of starting to ratchet these numbers up. They're not going to happen by themselves. The other ones say that 43% say they complained about their manager to their coworkers. that too is an issue because of the fact that that becomes a negative spiral that really starts affecting the entire organization. And typically, when they're doing all this, they're pointing their fingers directly to the manager. You've probably heard the expression, people join the company and leave their managers. And that is so true. And I think unequivocally, the statistics right now are in fact starting to prove that correct. Now, the other thing is what Gallup has found is work groups with high levels of engagement experience. Now, for those of you in the retail trade, 22% higher profitability, 21% higher productivity, 10% higher customer engagement. Those of you that are online from HR, look at the last two, or the second to last two, 37% lower absenteeism, 65% lower turnover. We do know in terms of HR statistics that on average, a person leaving an organization in terms of turnover costs, that is having to recruit somebody else, bring somebody else up to speed, costs in the vicinity of $60,000 to $100,000. So yeah, this 65% turnover is a fairly substantial figure. Those of you that are in mining industry or the sectors out there in terms of incidents and accidents, 48% fewer safety incidents have resulted from high levels of engagement in the workplace. So engagement in the workplace is actually, it's a global issue. I just wanted you to be aware of some of the numbers as they actually are out there and are being collected and documented. Here's the impact. Now we talked about the stuff in North America, yeah, and out in the world, and people go, yeah, so what? That doesn't really apply. Yes, it does. If you actually reduce this down to what does it really mean to me and my organization, the first sentence is the one that you should be actually mindful of. Gallup is estimating that disengaged employee costs. Take a look. For every $3,400, you're actually wasting an organization. For every $10,000 salary, what I'm saying, well, it's maybe not so much wasting, but the cost to your department, to your organization of disengagement is roughly $3,400 for every $10,000 of salary. Now, that to me is a fairly staggering number when you take a look at it. And that's why when Gallup did the research, they said disengaged employees cost the American economy close to $350 billion. Let's really focus on the fact that for every $10,000 worth of salary in my department, if you're managing a department, or my company, if you actually have access to the G&A figures in terms of salary and salary compensation, and look at this ratio, it's pretty mind-boggling. What are your thoughts right now? Down below in the area where it says questions, do you want to just write down what you're thinking right now? I don't see anything showing up, and I know that you are thinking something, and I'm just making sure that everything is actually working fine here. Thank you, Sam. He was saying the third statement is really important to him. Yeah, and I was going to touch on that a little bit later. So then let's spend some time there right now. This is actually the multiplying effect. And I spent a lot of time working with managers and leaders in the coaching realm. And this comes up, I would say, 50% of the time in our conversations is, the morale in this place, the negative attitude that I sense is happening. And it may not be in my department, but I can see it in other departments. Very, very true. Is, if I'm negative, chances are I'm going to tell somebody something bad about the organization, and it's going to affect somebody else. And we need to get around this. And I'll show you some methodologies as we go through the slide deck in terms of what you can do to really re-engage people. Robert, has spent some a question here into where are we here, Robert? Let me just take a look at, how do we re-engage the disengaged? I'm glad you asked that question because I'll be sharing that just momentarily with you. I believe that there is a better way. And for you, this sign I think is true. It's just ahead. I have experimented with a lot of stuff over my, I guess, 30 years in business, and there are some things that have worked. I can also tell you that I have read numerous books, and I mean 20, 30 books in this area of engagement. And some of them is very theoretical and esoteric. I have been accused by a lot of my colleagues as being a pracademic, a practical academic. It's really important to really understand that I don't want to waste your time here today, and I really didn't want to waste my time. I experimented in what I refer to as sort of the leadership laboratory of things that have worked. I have worked with best practices of organizations all through North America over the last decade in my consulting practice, and there are some things that are showing up that are consistent and they're happening from company to company. And I want to share that some of that knowledge with you today. First is you need to earn the right to lead. And I have a lot of leaders say, "Yeah, but I'm in a leadership position." And I go, "Yeah, so what? What are you doing today to be better in terms of being a leader?" Now, I guess a lot of people say that that's really difficult. Absolutely, it is. Leadership is not for the faint. Leadership is probably one of the toughest things that I have experienced in my entire life. And the more complicated the company is, the more it becomes difficult. Some of you I know are online from healthcare. My hats are off to you because I don't think I've seen anything like I've seen in the last 10 years when it comes to cutbacks and productivity levels and all sorts of stuff. That's why it's important to step up and really start assessing your own skills in terms of how can I do this better. Alain says, how can I get one agent to be engaged? It's really easy, and I mean, I'm not making light of this, but once you know the fundamentals of why people really want to step up and do their best, you can start deploying that on a one-off basis. You can start deploying that on a team basis, and we'll spend some time talking about some of this as we go forward. Now, the other question I'm going to ask as far as earning the right to lead, uh, and I'm not here to insult anybody, but I really, really want to stress a point. Is one is over the last year, if you actually were to add up, and the cost of getting your haircut, men and ladies, and multiply it by 12, assuming you're getting your haircut every 12 months, and then ask yourself, okay, in many cases it's going to be 20 bucks, it's $240. Women, I know my wife spends a lot more than that. But if you start looking at the number, I'm surprised sometimes to see that, we spend more on our heads than we do in our heads. And what I mean by that is how often are you actually taking initiative to read a book on leadership to become a little bit better? And we're not talking here margins of 50%. I'm talking here in terms of margins of 5 or 10%. Even 1% better at what you do is the impact that it has on the organization. So earning the right to lead is really starting to understand that, what, I have a responsibility to sharpen myself on a fairly regular basis. And that may mean some extracurricular reading. It may taking a free course in the workplace. I know that my wife, who's a nurse, is off taking a coaching course today. Kudos to her and kudos to the health system because that is a vital role. I'll be spending some time talking about how important coaching is in the environment that we live in. So your role as leader, and I mean, this is only some of it, is, you're there to motivate, you're there to inspire, you're there to coach, you're there to mentor. You really have to take care of teamwork. Again, part of this entire thing is, what is my vision? And leading by example. I mean, all of this is critical. And then many of you say, well, yeah, but I have more responsibilities. I totally agree. You probably do. And ultimately, it's to win, to actually make a difference. in the workplace. And this is what, I'm wanting to spend some time. I want you to make a difference starting today. But I also know on a leadership development framework that I've been sort of working on over the last, 10 years of my consulting career, I think you need to become familiar with this pyramid or pyramids or whatever you want to call it, primarily because some of us have found ourselves leading organizations when in fact we have not been able to lead ourselves. And what I mean by that is leading self means being self-aware, taking a look and taking an inventory of who I am, what are my strengths, and I'm a very deliberate person when it comes to strength-based coaching. Some weaknesses, you know what, people, we're not going to be able to alleviate. We spend too much time on trying to become better in areas that we will probably never become better. Case in point, I did a miserable job in algebra when I was in high school. I worked and worked and worked and worked and, got average grades. How much time do I dedicate to that? Actually, at this point, zero, because it really doesn't affect my effectiveness in what I'm doing. As a leader, though, there may be some things that are career limiting. Integrity, for one, is one. Saying what you're going to do and not ever doing it. Yes, those are weaknesses, and yes, you have to sort of fix those out. But by and large, I am really adamant around developing your strengths. A strength-based leadership is, I think, the corollary to success in the workplace. Know what it is, know what they are. There are all sorts of assessments out there. Some of them are free. Some you're going to have to pay money for. There are some that, again, you can do online. The more you know about yourself, the better you're going to be able to lead the next step up, and that's your team. Because your team will see those strengths, and it's important for them to be online with you, because if they're not, they become disengaged. I'm working with organizational leaders who are having a struggle because they are self-unaware and have spent very little time assessing themselves, but actually blaming their teams and their organization. Really, we need to get back to understanding who we are. Now, that may sound complicated. It does take time, granted, but I think all of us are on that journey. Find out about yourself. If you've done a Myers-Briggs, take a look at it and start looking at how am I impacting those around me. If I've done a 360, it's time to dust it off and start looking at that and really getting on purpose around what you found there, because that is going to be a delimiting factor in your success. And your success then with your team level is actually going to be inflicted, or I guess reflected rather, on your organization. But you need to have the will, as you can see in the right-hand side of that diagram. Do I, you know, do I have the passion and the courage to do what my organization needs me to do? Intuition, do I know what to do, when to do it, and how to do it? And then the last one up on top is my abilities. Do I have the skill to do what my organization needs me to do? And this is a self-reflection for all of you that are online today, and just really asking yourself, how do I stand in all those categories? How well am I self-aware? How well am I integrating with my team? Can I get better? Because if you're not effectively working with your team, chances are you're probably not going to get that promotion into, the higher ranks of the organization. Many organizational leaders that I work with in the C-suite are looking for individuals who, in fact, are doing extremely well with their teams. That is likely 90% of the reason they get promoted, is if they can actually work with their teams, then chances are they can work at the next level, which is a little bit more complex. So it all starts with me. Self-awareness. I'm going to ask the question, will you see this image? What are you thinking? So write it down in the comments. What's your first impression when you see this image? Yeah. Gossip in the workplace. How others perceive. Worrying about worrying about what others think. Lynn, you said gossip. Michael, unapproachable. Looks like a negative culture. Sam, thank you. Alan, dissatisfied employees. We care too much about what others think about us. Michael, gossip. Robert, the two are talking about her, but she has no idea they are talking about her. Absolutely. People, this is happening to you and me. And again, some of the things that they are seeing are things that maybe we should be aware of in terms of our own personal development. And many times, if you're not connected with your employees, this happens on a fairly regular basis. And what does that really mean? I mean that we sometimes are what I refer to as human doings and not human beings. We're so busy and caught up in the doing that we fail to connect with individuals as a human being. So it's easy for them to make dispersions around us because they don't know us. And we walk around sometimes wondering, what are they thinking? Uh, Change that around. Start becoming aware, self aware, that in order to get around this issue, I need to start connecting with my people. And we'll talk about that in a minute in terms of how do I connect? Because again, we're running at 110 miles an hour, and some of you may be at 120, and we fail to connect with our reports, with our peers, and in some cases, frankly, with our supervisors. I had a coaching conversation last week with the senior vice president who mentioned to me, my report structure. This one individual, I don't think I've talked to him in over 4 months. And I go, well, is that his problem or your problem? And he has a pensive look in his, and said, well, what do you mean, Greg? I says, well, seriously, how well do you connect with your people? And his philosophy was, well, I guess I do when they ask me stuff around work. And I says, you know what, you're missing it. You need to connect with them around who they are as individuals. Because again, we get so into the workaday world that we forget that there's actually people doing it. And today's sort of session is really around, okay, how do I now start learning on how to really connect at that level that is meaningful, that engages people, so that those numbers you can then say, you know what, I don't think apply to me. Now, leadership growth for you and me is really around leadership behavior on the left side over time. Now, as you become more proficient with leading self, there will be a pivotal moment when chances are somebody's going to tap you on the shoulder and say, you know what, from a technical perspective, you're doing an awesome job. And you will probably get a promotion to a managerial job. And I know some of you are thinking, man, if I would have known that, I probably wouldn't have been so good at what I'm doing because now I've got a bunch of challenges that I really cannot handle. Now, suck it up. It's really, really important to understand that, again, people with leadership skills are required in the workplace. They're needed in the world. So you're now leading others. And as you become more and more proficient in leading others, you will find yourself getting into positions of leading the organization. And many of you are in that position. And it's not by guess or by golly, it's because you've shown up on somebody's radar screen, probably at the next level above you, saying, hey, I really like what you're doing in that department. Would you consider coming over to ours or whatever, or get recruited? Many of you, sometimes will get headhunted. Your reputation does precede you when it comes to leadership. So what's the difference between leadership and management? What do you think? Let's just do a little poll here and see how, what you think. So how would you define leadership and how would you define management? So write it down below. I know you're thinking about it. Let's put some pen to paper in terms of what is the difference between leadership and management. Thank you, Gary. Guiding versus doing. Absolutely. Tony, budgets and scheduling are managed. People are led. Perfect. Management is directing. Thank you, Trevor. Management is executing tasks and task orientation. Jacqueline, making leadership is making people believe in what they, the organization, are doing. Management is going through the motions, getting what needs done. Yeah, you're on the right track. Actually, you're more than on the right track. Managers get it done at a cost regardless. Thank you, Robert. Kevin, management is all about the process and procedures. Leadership is about guidance and mentoring. Okay, let's just stop here for a moment and let's just go through the next slide. All of you are absolutely correct. Now, as a matter of fact, Peter Drucker, who's a management guru, I think defined this really quite crisply and clearly when he said that leading is doing the things right, managing is doing the right things. And that rings in my head every time anybody ever asks me. Now, the dilemma that I face now with organizations is, you know, sorry, Zach, I missed you. Management consists of implementing the vision and strategy provided by the leaders. Absolutely. So you can see that it's the planning, the organizing, the controlling that's on that side of managing. Leading is really setting direction, aligning people, and motivating people. That's your role as a leader. Now, part of this leadership dilemma in terms of engaging other people is really starting to understand who they are in terms of where do I spend my time and effort. And this is one of the areas where we actually, many people, when I say we, it's me included, because I made the mistake before of attempting to treat everybody in my organization the same way. And unfortunately for me, early in my career, it was treating everybody as if they belonged in box S1 or in the directing mode. Now, we do know from significant amount of research, and one of the leaders in this is this Dr. Peter Hersey, who actually talks about situational leadership in terms of, you know what, we disengage people by virtue of how we actually treat them. Now, our leadership styles vary, and they should from time to time, but you cannot continue to work in one of these one of these cubes all your life. You need to understand that from a person like, for example, like a new hire, you would probably spend more time as in the S1 category because you're going to have to learn how to direct them. The leader has to decide that this position you're highly directive and low supportive behavior because you know what, you need to get this done. Now, whether you're doing it or you have somebody in your organization doing it, it's important. What ends up happening is as the competency level of that individual increases, they start moving through this curve from the right hand to the left hand. I also see on the other side leaders who are personally giving away a lot of work to individuals that basically have not achieved the competency levels or the technical skills, and they become, in fact, the employees become very disengaged because they're basically giving assignments to individuals that they think are competent when in fact they're not, and they're failing miserably. And then we blame the employee for that. No, people, it's not the employee's problem. It's our problem. The coaching in the top right-hand corner is what ends up happening when people become competent. You have to spend some time. Let's talk. Let's collaborate. Let's look at ways of improving the situation. And then you move them into that supporting role in terms of what is it that you think is important? Give me the options. Let's talk about the options and spend some time outlining what may in fact work. And then saying, okay, go ahead and try and see what happens. So they're on a continuum. But we do fail as leaders sometimes to really understand where our employees, or in terms of our reports, are on this continuum. We sometimes believe that, you know, once they're there, they're always there. and that's a false pretense. We need to understand that they are moving through a continuum, and we're responsible for that. When I talk with employees when they've actually been dismissed, and I ask, what went wrong? And I would say 90% of them would say, you know what, I just honestly did not fit in there. The manager always kept telling me what to do. I was never supported. It just was not a very pleasant situation. And then I go back to the company that's hired me to do the outplacement or whatever you want to call it, and I start talking with them. And I get a lot of people going, "Wow, did not know that." Uh, I don't want you to be in that position of saying, I don't know that, because I need you to start looking at how am I working with my people? How am I connecting with them to allow them to actually graduate from S1 over to S2, over to S3, over to S4? Because the more directive you are, the more resistant people are to change. Now, if you take a look at follower readiness, you'll know that then the S1, they come on board as typically low competence and a high commitment. And that's true for most positions. Now, I have people ask me, well, can I actually be in D1 after I've been in a company in 3 years after a promotion? Absolutely. Because what's happened is you've actually been shifted into another role where, in fact, maybe your competency isn't that high, or if you've been put into another department, it really is important to understand where you are along that continuum in terms of your own personal readiness. I'm not. I don't know if you're familiar with the 4 levels of learning, and especially in adult-centered education. And if you were to actually draw a series of steps from left to right on a piece of paper in front of you, and then at the first step, put unconsciously incompetent. The next step is consciously incompetent. The third step is consciously competent. And the last one is unconsciously competent. Now, all of you throughout your careers and your roles have gone through that process. We all have started sometimes, and I hope not all times, where we're actually given a role that we really are unaware of how unaware we are. It's not until you start spending some time, or your coach is actually, or your leader is actually probably directing you, coaching, supporting, and delegating, do you finally start realizing that, you know what, I was really dumb when I first started that role. I was unconsciously incompetent. I did not know what I did not know. And then we progress to, okay, now I know what I don't know. And that's being consciously incompetent. And that's starting to take the next step, what I call failing forward or falling forward, to really start saying, okay, now what can I do? And that's when you become consciously competent. Many of you that are on this line are very consciously competent by virtue of the fact that, one, you're here. You're wanting to become consciously competent in this area of leadership and engagement. And it takes an effort. After you do this, time in and time out again, and become really proficient at this, you will start doing this unconsciously. And this is where ultimately I want all of you to be in what you're doing in terms of your leadership skills and your engagement skills, is to become unconsciously competent. You do it and you don't even know you're doing it. And others around you are watching this and saying, man, if only I could be like, Robert, Alessandra, Zach, Kevin, Jeremy, Lynn. And they look at you in awe, but they don't know the price that you've paid. And the price you've paid is actually going through this continuum on your own and really becoming consciously competent and then becoming unconsciously competent. And that's your role as a leader in terms of engaging your people, is really to start taking them through the the situational leader matrix. No, by the way, people, I know that some of you are madly scribbling. I will be sending, not that I'm going to discourage you from not continuing to do it, but I will be sending you the recording within the next, I would say, 48 hours. So you can actually go through this all over again if you want, or you can actually share this with individuals in your organization. This one particularly, for those of you that are compliant and really want to learn about the leadership, situational leadership, is one to spend some time really understanding where you actually have to be supportive and where directive behavior is best. And I'm not going to go through this because I've sort of touched on it, but I think it's important that when you do go home or when you're finished this particular workshop, that you actually take some time and list each employee that you have, and especially those that you right now are finding a bit of a struggle with. Now, I know that many of you could probably write those, 8 or 9 points or individuals down right now, and I think that's important. And especially so after you're done today, is say, look, I need to learn how to actually take people through that continuum. I need to build connections with individuals. Many people sometimes have alluded to the fact that I wish my employer or I wish my manager would have spent more time with me during my learning process. We sometimes hire people and drop them. And I hear this time and time again. I have been guilty of this in the past. I only regret that I can't go back to the people and say, look, please forgive me for that because I sort of messed up your career a little bit early on. But you know what? We're all learners. It's a learning laboratory, and you can't get sort of mired down over what you could have, should have, and could have done. It's what are we doing now going forward? So as an exercise for you, please list your employees, those that you believe you need to start developing and connecting with. The other thing that's really important is really to understand the essence of knowing your employee. How well do you know your people? And it's a rhetorical question, but how well do you really know people? Do you know what their hobbies are, what their sports, and are they sports enthusiasts? You need to start connecting with them at what's meaningful for them. And not every employee is the same, because you are working in a 4-generational workplace. This is the first time in the history of mankind that there's actually 4 generations at work at any one time. And each one of them has special needs and special wants. If you're looking at this and saying, man, this is, I never thought of this before, you need to become aware of this. There's a great book out there. It's called When Generations Collide. And I honestly don't know the author, but if you're at all interested in starting to learn a little bit more about what's it going to take to connect with these 4 generations in the workplace, that definitely is a good read. The other thing is to really start developing messages that engage and mobilize. Now, some of you are probably thinking, oh, come on, Greg, really? Yeah, really. I have worked with individuals who have mastered this art, and I'm envious of their ability to communicate that deeply with individuals that people will put their pens down and start listening to when that person addresses not only individually, but that team. I want you to think back to that time in your career, or maybe even recent career or other, former careers, where somebody connected with you. What was that conversation like? I mean, some of you may not be able to verbatim tell me what it is, but I believe there was a deep connection that happened as a result of either a success at work or an observation of you in the workplace at work that meant something. Every one of us has been through multiple situations like that. I can recall I can recall about 6 of them that I've had in my career, various levels through the career, that stood out amongst all the others. And I don't believe for a moment that that was sort of done by sort of just off the hip or just off the top of the head, because I don't think people could have chosen those words in just simple dialogue. I could be wrong. I just know that I could not have done that. I have had scripts that I have written before I've actually gone and presented it to individuals. The fact that going over and saying, hey, you've done a great job is not going to cut it. Telling somebody they've done a great job and you appreciate them working that hard does not cut it. They need to understand what job. What are you referring to? What is the behavior that you saw? That's the stuff that really makes a difference to individuals. We use a lot of pet generic clauses or phrases that, to my opinion, are fluff. If you really want people to get engaged, they need to understand that you mean it and you've taken some deliberate time to spend with them, telling them exactly what they've been doing right. Any questions around this? I mean, I'd like you to type in some stuff. How well are you at messaging when it comes to engaging and mobilizing your staff? Have you done it? What have been some of the results? So please, if you don't, please take some time just to sort of focus on, or even tell me a little bit about, one of the times that you've actually experienced this. What does it look like to you? Thank you, Dave. Inspiring, caring. I still say I would do anything for leader X. Okay. What does that tell that individual? That Dave cares, that he is prepared to sacrifice to get something for somebody. It's, again, being selfless. And I think as a leader, we have to be selfless. We find ourselves sometimes being selfish, and our people know it. If I'm motivating somebody and they understand that, he's doing it only for an ulterior purpose, being him, likely they're going to become disengaged. So, creating a message where people understand that, this is important, but it's also part of my developmental program is something that's a little bit deeper beyond just doing the job. Explaining to him or her what they've done in such a way that they're going to do more of it is when you start getting engagement levels higher than you actually may be experiencing right now. Is there anybody else who wants to make a comment? Yeah, planting a seed. Anna, thank you. Planting a seed on what they're supposed to do versus telling them what to do. Absolutely. Good point. And I ran across this actually last Friday working with the team. Some of the team leaders were saying the more I push, it seems the more resistance I have. Absolutely. Especially with adults. You may get away with it with your kids, but with adults, the more you push, the more they will push, or the opposite of that. They don't push back at all. And guess what happens? They become passive aggressive. They'll tell you everything you want to hear, but still don't do it. That is called disengagement. Robert, I often have said a good job, but I've been trying lately to be more specific around that particular message or behavior. Awesome. That is going to make such a huge difference when you start understanding and mastering the fact that what does a good job look like, and asking if that in fact could be something that you can expect from that individual in the future. You're going to get a buy-in, you're going to get a yes, and you're also going to get the action. Gary, um, getting others to be as passionate about work as I am. Absolutely. And this is really what when it comes into, people see and will mimic behaviors, successful behaviors. One of the things I have said to my VPs that I coach or senior managers that I coach who are aspiring to become better and becoming VPs or senior VPs is start finding out what is it about the behaviors in terms of why are they doing the things they're doing, and then starting to mimic that behavior. Start acting and start thinking like the next level up in the organization. And people will see that. And that, yes, it does take some time, but quite frankly, it's well invested time. What does engagement around you look like in organizational leaders that you're actually reporting to? Start looking at that and start asking, yourself, how can I become more like that? And it will bring up your level of your level of leadership, but more importantly, it's going to bring up your level of engagement. When people see that you're engaged, they become inspired. Whoops, let's go back. Sorry about that. The other thing is around role design in organizational work is when you're working with individuals, especially when you're onboarding, be quite specific around what their role is and in designing that role. We fail sometimes to be specific. I've had individuals that I have talked to after they have left an organization and said, Well, honestly, I didn't even know what my role was there. I just was asked to do this and I was asked to do that. And it became Groundhog Day, the same day over and over again. And yeah, I've done it for 14 months or 18 months, but it would have helped if I would have had some dialogue with my manager on at least a quarterly basis around, am I doing what needs to get done? Am I accomplishing the roles? Please, people, in terms of engagement, talk to your people around how are they doing at work in terms of their roles and responsibilities. Are there things that they need to help, that they need your help in developing? That's critical. We always make the assumption that people will come and ask us. Don't make that assumption. They won't. This is one of the major, I guess, crooks in the road. And, why I say this is I have failed miserably in the past in this. I had to really start looking at the fact that, you know what, not everybody's a mind reader. And I have sort of been really vague sometimes in my career. And this is when I go back 20 years. I have learned over the last 20 years or the last 15 years of my career that the clearer the expectations, the better the result. People do not get up in the morning and say to themselves, I wonder how I can screw up today. And I know some of you are snickering and laughing. Yeah, I mean, whose intention is it really? Nobody's. But without expectations, how do we fulfill what's really expected of me? We may look like we're screwing up. And if that's the case, then again, the onus is back on your leader, your manager, to really sit down with you and have these expectations discussed. Let me go back. Sorry, I'm sort of getting ahead of myself here. And, again, I can't stress how important this is in that level of engagement. When I have worked with individuals who have gone through an executive employee effectiveness or an engagement survey and have looked at the results around, certain departments, why is it that certain departments, and I was, privy to one that was done by Gallup, I guess last year, where it was not evenly spread throughout the organization. There were some departments that weren't as good as others. And, again, the manager asked me and sort of said, I sort of was talking to one of my colleagues and, his level was around 37%. And I go, okay, yeah, work to be done. And I says, just out of curiosity. And this guy was a crackerjack. I mean, the guy gets it. And his was around 83. And that was, sure, there was only 12 people, I believe, in his reporting structure. But I asked him fundamentally, why do you think that's the case? And he did not hesitate. He says, I spend a lot of my time connecting with my individuals, letting them know specifically what is expected, telling them what good work or output looks like, and then leaving them to the task of accomplishing it. So I says, you're not directive at all. He goes, absolutely not. He says, I've learned in my career that that does not get me anywhere, and quite actually it discourages my people when they feel excuse me, that my leader or my boss or my has told me what to do. And he has found that the greater chances are that if you are actually giving your people directions, the greater the incidence of their discouragement or disengagement in the workplace. We like our autonomy in the workplace. We have been hired to do a job. Give us the opportunity, give us the expectations, tell us what the goal lines look like, and then coach us if you have to get us through there, through the end zone. And that's what setting clear expectations are. Now I'm going to turn this around a little bit too, because quite frankly, I find this somewhat, uh, in a way, sort of disturbing. One is the fact that as leaders, we have expectations of others. And the question I'm going to pose to you, and as I have to a lot of my coaching clients, is have you ever asked your employees during a quarterly review what they expect from you? And I mean, honestly, if I could only get $1 for every time I've seen that sort of blank look in people's eyes, many people have said, you know what, Greg, not really. What I'm asking you to do, people, because of the fact, again, we're dealing with engagement today. Get engaged, get in the process. You better start understanding that there are expectations of you. And if you're not asking for them, Make today, at least one thing that you do today as a result of this, is next time you spend some time with people, ask them, what are they expecting from you? Make this a bilateral working relationship. Does this make sense? Okay, I'm getting a lot of yeses. My only ask today is of you, one, start becoming proactive and meeting your people and surprise the heck out of them by asking them what are they expecting from you in order for them to be successful. And then start getting a pen and pencil out, because probably for the first time in your life, you're going to get people asking, hey, I just wish you would spend more time. I wish I had more face-to-face time. I wish that you would give me more feedback, positive or negative. And when I say negative, that means constructive feedback. You'll be surprised. Not only that, but people will start understanding that, I've got this premise that I've used all my life in work, is that people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And it's that caring element that you want them to be successful. Thank you, Gary. I care, you care. Absolutely. I mean, for those of you that are looking at this, great phrase. I care, you care. It takes both of us to make this thing happen. What we're fighting in organizations where more is expected with less is that we're trying to do this by ourselves, leaders. We are trying to move the herds of individuals to the finish line, but they are not prepared for whatever reason to ask you for support in certain areas. So if you're not asking, you should start asking. What are their expectations of you? They may need a sit down. They may need a coaching session around a certain element, having a difficult conversation with somebody. If you leave them and assume that it's going to happen, it's not going to. And this is the problem. We make too many assumptions in the workplace. Let's get clear around the expectations. This is another element of engagement that I have found interesting over the last probably 7 years of my practice. As I've been traveling and talking to individuals, I'm starting to find that storytelling has become a bit of a diversion from typical leadership, in sense that leaders are being encouraged now to tell stories. And I think there's some significance in that, because if you go back to your own sort of family history, to when you met on Christmases. There's a lot of storytelling that ended up happening. There's a great book out there. It's called Leader's Guide to Storytelling. It's the author's name, I believe, is Denning, Denning. Uh, in terms of our levels of communication and becoming better at what we do, he basically says that, you know what, maybe we're missing it with a lot of people. We need to start telling stories that engage and mobilize. All of you have been through the war somewhere at work, and that the positive thing is that there was a positive outcome. Start relating back to your own experiences. Start asking people what their story is. The last time I did that with a client, right off the bat, we started talking, and this is before I even started an engagement process in terms of starting to work with him. I actually used exactly what you see in front of you. Dear, whatever his name was, I'm not going to share that. What's your story? And I sat back and listened for about an hour. And, I sort of walked away from that and said, wow, this guy has been probably waiting all his life to offload that. And boy, do I have a great insight into who he is. And I saw that his levels of engagement being high. I saw that he's, again, wanting to mobilize his department. It could have taken me months of coaching to understand this individual. But when you start asking an individual what their story is, you start understanding who they are. We see the veneer of individuals, and from an engagement perspective, engagement, it's not the surface. It's what's happening on in the heart and in the brain. And telling stories that engage and mobilize has an emotional attraction for many of us. So again, part of that engagement process is learning how to start your communications differently and starting to look at people from a deeper perspective of not a question of what they are, a question of who they are. So, and again, share some of your own stories with individuals to get them engaged and mobilized. You're going to find yourselves in situations where people feel demoralized. Not for a minute do I believe that you've never been there before. Tell your story. How did I get through this? What was the situation that I was in? What was the outcome? If I could have, would have, should have done something better around this, what would that have been? That's the learning from telling stories. People can relate to that. The other thing is really around engaging your people is maybe starting to look at your leadership style. Now, again, you can Google it in terms of leadership styles. There are typically 5. And for those that, again, one is called laissez-faire. And that's somebody who basically just, honestly does show up and sort of goes through the motions of being a leader and everything's okay. Que sera, sera. Whatever will be. Please don't be that person. But there are those out there. There's the autocratic leader. They're the ones that are, again, directive. They're the ones that are telling, not asking. There are times, people, when you do have to be autocratic, when decisions have to be made. If there's something that's really safety and it's safety related, yeah, you have to become autocratic in your approach. But that does not work all the time. Some of us have got some bad habits that we learn and basically have kept. Start looking and asking yourself, do I have some of those? The other one is participative, basically saying that, hey, we try to do things here in a democratic style. Now, there is some dangers with that. Democracies sometimes fail. There has to be a balance. And this is what I'm asking you to do here, is recalibrate and adjust your leadership style. If you're seen as being somebody who's too participative, they may think that he or she is not capable of doing the job. So again, take a look at your style in relation to these 5. The other one is transactional. And transactional leadership is really, I do this for you, you do this for me, and that becomes how we, in fact, relate. Now, the last one is it's called a transformational leadership style, where a lot more coaching, a lot more face-to-face time, a lot more connecting starts happening. And transformational, it really depends on high levels of communication. So if you're finding yourself at 110 miles an hour and not having time, you may have to start asking yourself, am I really communicating as well as I can be? Because the people around you need to be transformed. It's not a transaction, it's a transformation. And it's the same thing in organizational leadership. It's not a transactional motivational thing, it's a transformation motivational thing. So take a look. I will probably send a link to some of this in terms of material. I just didn't want to become so heavily laden with slides. But if you are curious about your leadership style, you can go and Google the 5 leadership styles and have a read at that, and then make some incremental adjustments. Here's one that I sort of grabbed. Please, this is my sense of humor. This is not the 8 types of leaders, but you sort of get the point. I like that cheerleader. You guys rock. Who wants a pizza? Yeah. Or the other one, the windbag, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, that's all they do is talk. So, we all fit in this tongue in cheek somewhere, but I think if you look at the other 5 types of leadership, you'll find yourself in one of those. Oops, let's go back here. Just 1 second. Review your rewards and system and your recognition system. When in fact, this is one of the areas that we talk about as being disengaging. People say, yeah, it's the money. Frankly, people, it's not the money. I'll show you some research done around this, and it's not about the money. Okay, acknowledge each employee appropriately. Not all people want to be, again, congratulated in public. If you're into, understand Myers-Briggs, introverts do not like the limelight. You're embarrassing people. In fact, when you're asking and congratulating somebody in public, sometimes introverts need to be sort of just you and him, you and her. So just acknowledge each employee appropriately. Understand that. When we talked about, around compensation, I get a lot of people saying, why do people show up at work? And here is a theory of motivation as presented by Frederick Hertzberg, who's been around doing stuff for Harvard for over 20 years. And I think, if anything, if you can master the top three in terms of engaging your people, most people, when you really ask them why do they come to work, you'll see that money is way down the bottom. It's actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 points up from the bottom. And there's a reason for that. At a certain level, once we become, again, happy with what we're earning, it's no longer the salary or the money that motivates us. It's really the top three. It's a sense of achievement. Why is it that you come to work every single day? Is it the money? I doubt it. It's really around the sense of accomplishments or the sense of achievement. Now, the question to you is, how often have you ever asked that question of a report for them to define what they believe and how they define achievement? And I think it's important to take some time here and just sort of think about that for a moment. Uh-oh, something just happened to my slide deck. Just 1 second, people. I'll get right back to it. There we go. You know as well as I do that people do want to achieve at work. The problem is we sometimes delimit that ability as leaders. You need to be aware that everybody comes to work to achieve. Nobody comes to work to fail. It's a question of, do we understand what that achievement is for them, and how do we get them there? Secondly, is if they are in fact achieving, are you spending time in recognizing them? And again, we talked about it in the former slide, face to face, or if they're extroverts and they like the public recognition, then yeah, so be it. Let's do it that way. But people need to have a sense of accomplishment and they need to be recognized for it. And my fear is that most of us are running so fast that we never, ever take the time to be very specific in those areas where people have excelled and recognizing them. We sometimes do it, but it's 2 weeks too late. Catch them doing it now. Take the time out of your busy schedule. You can be late for a meeting by recognizing somebody. It's really that important. And secondly, if all those, if the achievement and the recognition are done properly, then the work itself becomes fun. And what I've again experienced working with individuals now and clients and teams and executive teams is when you have these three clicking and they're working, engagement levels go through the roof because people have a sense of achievement, they're being recognized for the work, and the work itself becomes a driver in terms of wanting to come to work. And this can all happen by all the things that we've actually talked about today. And then the third one, if you really want to go, or the fourth one is actually getting a little deeper, is this sense of responsibility. People want autonomy. If you're a micromanager, that's not a good thing because people feel like, you know what, I will be held accountable and held responsible. Just tell me what it needs to get done. So if we can master these three for sure, and that fourth one, you'll see the level of engagement go up. People will care about the bottom line because they see that I'm being taken care of in my levels of expertise around achievement, recognition, and the work itself. They will not become arm's length employees, as I refer to them as, where, yeah, you know what, Mr. Leader, you go make it happen, and I'll help you where I can. I want people to become right there beside you. I want them to become partners in the workplace. And to do that, we need to sort of assess where we are with people. What are we doing differently? Next thing is really develop your employees for the future. Not for today, for the future. I think sometimes we spend too much time focusing on what's happening today and not catching our breaths and saying, what can I do for you today? We sometimes have this philosophy is, what can you do for me? No, drop that one. Is, what can I do for you, Mr. Employee or Mrs. Employee, in terms of, again, solidifying your future. And it really comes down to a whole bunch of stuff, and we really don't have the time to talk about all of that today. But just be aware is the awareness here is it's the future we're concerned about. We are in the present. What are you doing to engage people for the future? And especially when it comes to the guests, the Gen X and Gen Y, they're very concerned about what's happening to them now. Those of us that are boomers or older, you know what? We sort of did our own thing. We sort of, again, we didn't rely too heavily on other individuals for our success. We sort of did it. X's and Y's need your support, and they need to learn, and they need to be led. And then we get into, feedback and coaching. The greatest gift you can give an employee is feedback. Do you hear me? The greatest thing or the greatest reward that you can give is feedback. If I, again, in my duty as a coach, hear it from time and time again, I just wish I had some feedback. I wish I had some feedback. I got my review back this quarter and it doesn't look good. Why did they wait a quarter to tell me that I wasn't doing this? Feedback is essential for engagement, and so is coaching. Rather than telling somebody how bad they are, tell them that there's an opportunity for development growth. I'm here to help you, and this is what it's going to look like. Now, I'm not going to go into all the details. I will send you this. One of my colleagues, Terry Dillon from the Refinery Partners, actually was the architect behind this, and I think he did a phenomenal job on actually looking at the performance curve and establishing where most of us are along that. And, if this is something you really want to get involved, please drop me an email. Any of these topics that we're actually covering today, if there's even the slightest interest, I will put together a workshop and take you through it. Now, you're probably asking, why are you doing this? I have a lot of colleagues that are asking me, I can't believe you're giving away information. I'm at that point in my life where, you know what? It really doesn't matter. If you want to spend time with me one-on-one, yeah, okay. But if it means putting on a webinar like this, dealing with issues that are really pertinent to your success, this is going to sound a little bit crazy, but I get my kicks watching other people succeed, because it's really, for me, that's what it's all about. I told you earlier that my passion is for leadership and leadership success. That starts with you. And if I can make your life just that much better as a leader, then I feel that I've succeeded. And the performance curve is one thing that, again, if you're not aware of, it's out there. We could spend some time. I wouldn't mind spending an hour if you wish on this. It actually will provide a lot of clarity. We can spend some time talking about the experience cube and having difficult conversations. Those are things that I think are also important for you, that if you're actually wanting to engage people, that you do it in a way that's most important for them. And rather than be accusing people of poor performance, talking about developmental opportunities, the wording is everything. Talking to them about what you've observed. What impact is that having on you? What are you thinking in terms of what's happening in you, Mr. Leader, in terms of your thoughts about what's going on? And then the last one is, what is it that you want? Many of us have discussions with executives and with our teams and whatever else. We explain to them what you saw, how you're feeling, and your rationale behind it. But we all walk away never establishing what is it that you want. And before you go into a conversation, be prepared with your employees to tell them what you want, because they want explicit instructions from time to time. We talked about feedback. This is all part of the feedback loop. I'm not going to take this time. I'm going to spend some time here sort of, we can get into, if you want to take a look at sort of the grow model in terms of how do I actually coach people. We can talk, about that next time if you want. What I really want you to do is make something actionable from what you learned today. What is it that I picked up today, even just one thought that I can deploy starting 11:31? What's your idea? You can do the plan. What is it that I really want to accomplish when I get out there as a leader? An engagement process is in fact a contact event. You can't be passive about it. And many of us have been passive. It really means listing expectations, understanding that a good bulk of my employees are disengaged, some of them actively disengaged to the point of putting their hand on the doorknob. Because again, as we talked about Hertzberg, they feel like they're achieving, they're not being recognized. And you know what? The job, well, I've got sellable skills, I'll go across the street. That's happening right now, whether we want to believe it or not. Ask yourself the same question. Why is it that I left my former employer? And much of it is going to do with the bulk of the material we covered today. And I would probably hazard a guess it was really around that, I was achieving or I wasn't achieving. And if I was achieving, I wasn't recognized. And you know what? It all became Groundhog Day. The job just became the same thing over and over and over again, and I really didn't enjoy it. That's what leads to disengagement. And you've got a slide deck that you're going to have to be able to go through. But right now, I just want you to, in the area where it says questions, write down, what am I prepared to start doing differently today? What will I apply starting today?